For centuries, the Merovingians have been remembered not just as kings, but as symbols of a mystery that refuses to die. From bloodline legends to hidden symbols, their legacy still echoes through history, religion, and myth. In this documentary, we trace the record of their rise, their erasure, and their unfinished story. If Forgotten Chronicles like these intrigue you, subscribe and join us as we uncover the shadows of the past. The origins of the Merovingian dynasty can be traced to the middle of the 5th century, during a period when the Roman Empire was in visible decline. Across Gaul, Roman administration weakened, leaving space for the rise of new powers among the Frankish tribes. It was in this moment that Merovech, from whom the dynasty takes its name, is first recorded. His lineage was already surrounded by legend, later traditions claiming that his blood carried something beyond the ordinary, a sign of divine or even mythical favor. The dynasty found its true strength under Clovis I, Merovech's grandson, who became king around the year 481. At first, his rule extended only over a small territory, but through war and diplomacy, he brought together much of Gaul under Frankish control. His most decisive act, however, was not on the battlefield, but at the baptismal font. In the year 496, after victory against the Alemanni, Clovis converted to Catholic Christianity. This moment carried significance far beyond personal belief. By aligning himself with the Catholic Church, Clovis secured not only the support of the bishops of Gaul, but also the approval of the Roman tradition that still lingered in the region. Unlike other Germanic rulers who had embraced Arian Christianity, Clovis's conversion brought him into direct alliance with Rome's spiritual authority. It offered legitimacy that neither force of arms nor royal ancestry alone could provide. From this point, the Frankish kingdom was no longer a tribal domain, but a Christian monarchy recognized by both subjects and clergy. The Merovingians maintained outward symbols that set them apart. Chief among them was the tradition of long hair, never cut, regarded as a visible sign of their sacred kingship. This was more than appearance. It became a mark of legitimacy, and to shear a Merovingian's hair was to strip him of authority. Their rule, that Shim Durefor, rested not only on political success, but on a legacy that merged myth, faith, and symbol. From these beginnings, the Merovingians established themselves as heirs to both Roman order and Frankish strength. Their dynasty carried within it a sense of mystery, one that would endure long after their crowns were lost. The decline of the Merovingians did not occur through a single decisive battle, but through gradual displacement. By the 8th century, the authority of the kings had weakened, while the mayors of the palace, the administrators who governed in their name, accumulated real power. Charles Martel, known for halting the advance of Muslim forces at Tours in 732, laid the groundwork for his family's ascendancy. His son, Pepin the Short, formalized the transition. In 751, with the support of the papacy, Pepin deposed Childeric III, the last Merovingian king, and received anointing as king in his own right. Official accounts framed this as reform. The Carolingians were presented as restorers of order, their rule sanctified by Rome. Yet this narrative required the quiet removal of Merovingian claims to sacred kingship. The dynasty was not destroyed violently, but erased with calculated silence. The symbols that once set Merovingians apart remained, but in altered form. Foremost among these symbols was the long hair, once the unmistakable emblem of Merovingian royalty. To cut the hair of a Merovingian prince was to strip him of legitimacy, a practice reflected in chronicles where dethroned rulers were tonsured and sent to monasteries. In the Carolingian age, this tradition was not continued. Instead, it was replaced by ecclesiastical rituals of coronation, shifting the source of legitimacy from sacred lineage to papal sanction. Other symbols endured in more subtle ways. The fleur-de-lis, associated in later centuries with French monarchy, has roots traceable to Merovingian use, appearing in artifacts and seals. Likewise, the bee, found in burial sites attributed to Merovingian rulers, resurfaced centuries later when Napoleon adopted it as a symbol of continuity with the most ancient dynasty of France. Such motifs suggest that while the dynasty's political power was buried, their imagery lingered in the cultural record. Thus, the Carolingians did not erase the Merovingians entirely. Instead, they redefined kingship, shifting it from a claim rooted in blood and myth to one grounded in papal approval. Yet the old symbols, preserved in chronicles, artifacts, and later adaptations, remained as silent witnesses to a displaced legacy. The Merovingian dynasty owed much of its authority not only to conquest but also to its relationship with the Catholic Church. The alliance was forged in a moment that shaped the future of Europe, the baptism of Clovis I. Around the year 496 at Reims, Clovis accepted Catholic baptism under the hand of Bishop Remigius. This act distinguished him from other Germanic rulers, many of whom adhered to Arian Christianity. By aligning himself with Catholic orthodoxy, Clovis secured the support of the Roman Church, gaining legitimacy that extended beyond Frankish warriors to the wider Gallo-Roman population. The Church reinforced this bond through chronicles and councils. Bishops such as Gregory of Tours recorded the deeds of Merovingian rulers, presenting their victories and conversions as instruments of divine will. The Council of Orleans in 511, convened by Clovis, further demonstrated the intertwining of royal and ecclesiastical authority. The assembly brought together bishops from across Gaul, strengthening ties between the crown and the clergy, while also confirming the Church's role in guiding and legitimizing the dynasty. Yet this relationship carried its own contradictions. The same clerical voices that exalted the dynasty could also undermine it. By the 7th century, chroniclers began to emphasize the growing weakness of Merovingian kings. Figures such as the do-nothing kings, roi fainéants, appeared in ecclesiastical records. A phrase that suggested divine favor had shifted away from the line of Merovec. The papacy's later blessing of Pepin the Short's coronation in 751 marked the final stage of this process. What had once legitimized Merovingian rule now authorized its replacement. Symbols linked to the dynasty endured, however, even when their political role diminished. Bees found in the tomb of Childeric Wow at Tournai were preserved as emblems of antiquity, later invoked by Napoleon as a deliberate connection to France's most ancient rulers. The fleur-de-lis, though more commonly associated with later Capetian and Bourbon dynasties, appears in early contexts linked to Merovingian artifacts and manuscripts. Both motifs suggest continuity, preserved quietly across centuries. Thus, the Church that once elevated the dynasty eventually sanctioned its erasure. But the symbols tied to Merovingian memory persisted, surviving in manuscripts, chronicles, and regalia. These fragments of imagery carried echoes of a legacy that political transition could not entirely suppress. The Cathar movement of southern France emerged in the 12th century, presenting a dualist doctrine that rejected Catholic orthodoxy. Their teachings separated the spiritual from the material, condemning the visible church as corrupt. Within this environment of dissent, traditions concerning a hidden gospel and a sacred lineage found new expression. Later chroniclers, as well as modern reinterpretations, connected the Cathars to ideas that the Merovingian bloodline preserved a fragment of divine descent. The notion that the Grail represented not a vessel but a lineage, sangreal or royal blood, can be traced in scattered writings. Medieval chronicles do not speak directly of such a theory, yet apocryphal texts and symbolic traditions supplied the framework. The Chanson de Geste and Arthurian Grail romances, while centered on allegorical quests, left room for interpretations that associated the Grail with dynastic continuity. In later centuries, these literary currents were retroactively linked to the idea of the Merovingians as guardians of a sacred inheritance. The Albigensian Crusade of the early 13th century, launched under papal authority, sought to eradicate Cathar belief. The campaigns devastated the Languedoc region, dismantling not only a religious community, but also the possibility that its teachings preserved alternative accounts of Christian origins. Ecclesiastical records describe the suppression in stark terms, framing it as the triumph of orthodoxy over heresy. Yet in popular memory, the destruction of the Cathars left space for speculation that they had concealed fragments of knowledge considered too dangerous to survive openly. By the 20th century, writers revived these threads, suggesting that Cathar resilience masked a continuity with Merovingian claims. The union of the bloodline motif with the Grail narrative gained visibility, especially Alian works that reinterpreted Sang-Real as evidence of descent from Christ and Mary Magdalene. Though lacking support in early sources, this interpretation circulated widely, presenting the Merovingians not merely as rulers, but as heirs of a sacred mystery. Thus, the Cathars' defeat did not erase the legend. Instead, their silence provided a canvas on which later traditions inscribed a story of hidden gospels, suppressed bloodlines, and symbols that merged faith with dynasty. The decline of Merovingian kingship preceded the rise of new powers in Frankish Europe. By the 7th century, royal authority had weakened. The Merovingian monarchs, often described in annals as do-nothing kings, retained the title but exercised little control. Real power was concentrated in the hands of the mayors of the palace, officials who managed royal estates and commanded armies. Among them, Charles Martel, mayor of the palace in the early 8th century, consolidated Frankish territories and secured victories that established the foundations for Carolingian authority. The transition from Merovingian to Carolingian rule was not abrupt, but marked by gradual displacement. Childeric III, the last Merovingian king, remained on the throne as a symbolic figure until 751. In that year, Pepin the Short, son of Charles Martel, petitioned the papacy to legitimize his claim to kingship. Pope Zachary responded by declaring that it was more fitting for the one who held power to bear the royal title. This decision provided the religious sanction needed to depose Childeric and formally inaugurate the Carolingian dynasty. The papal endorsement not only ended the Merovingian line, but also created a new model of authority. Kingship defined through papal approval rather than ancestral descent. The symbolic elements once associated with Merovingian sanctity, long hair, sacred genealogy, and legendary origins, were removed from political life. Instead, the Carolingians emphasized their role as defenders of the Church and champions of Christian unity. This shift, recorded in both papal correspondence and Frankish chronicles, framed the Carolingians as rightful rulers while casting the Merovingians into obscurity. Yet the memory of the displaced dynasty remained, preserved in fragments of legend and in interpretations that later connected their erasure to the survival of hidden traditions. The fall of the Merovingians and the sanctioned rise of the Carolingians created a pattern that would echo centuries later in the fate of the Knights Templar. Like the dynasty they followed, the Templars combined earthly influence with associations of sacred mystery, only to be dismantled by decree and remembered as guardians of something left unsaid. The question of Merovingian continuity did not end with the deposition of Childeric III in 751. Across later centuries, various records and genealogical claims suggested that the bloodline may have survived in obscurity. Chronicles and monastic registers occasionally mention cadet branches of Merovingian descent, though often in fragmented or disputed form. Such traces were later drawn together in speculative genealogies, linking the family not only to Frankish nobility, but also to wider European houses. By the late Middle Ages, these claims became entangled with the fate of the Knights Templar. Following the suppression of the order in 1307, legends circulated that certain members had fled to Scotland, where papal authority was weaker. In this narrative, the Sinclair family of Rosslyn emerged as custodians of Templar legacies, and by extension, of traditions tied to a supposed sacred lineage. Archival references to the Sinclairs as hereditary patrons of St. Clair and guardians of local ecclesiastical lands were later interpreted as evidence of a deeper custodial role. Rosslyn Chapel, founded in the 1440s by William Sinclair, became a focus of these traditions. Its carvings, documented in architectural surveys, include biblical scenes, pagan motifs, and symbolic patterns that do not conform to conventional ecclesiastical design. Later interpretations suggested that the chapel functioned as a symbolic archive, preserving through stone a synthesis of Christian orthodoxy, esoteric belief, and hereditary memory. Secret society documents from the 17th and 18th centuries further reinforced these associations. Manuscripts tied to early Freemasonry referred to Rosslyn as a site of ancient wisdom and connected the Sinclair family to traditions of guardianship. In this framework, Rosslyn was seen as both a monument to faith and a repository of encoded lineage. Visit overlapping strands, monastic notices, genealogical compilations, and later esoteric writings did not establish proof of Merovingian survival, but ensured the persistence of the claim. Rosslyn Chapel thus stands as a record of continuity, a place where the threads of dynastic legend, Templar survival and Grail tradition were bound together in stone. The Knights Templar were formally established in 1119 during the period of the Crusades. Their first task, according to contemporary charters, was the protection of pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem. Over time, the order expanded into one of the most powerful institutions in medieval Europe. Supported by papal bulls, they acquired land, wealth, and influence, developing a network of fortresses and commanderies that stretched across Christendom. By the mid-12th century, the Templars had grown into a military and financial power. They maintained armies for the defense of the Holy Land and operated an early form of international banking. Their activities were recorded in both papal registers and royal accounts, showing their deep integration into the political structure of medieval Europe. Yet their success also drew suspicion. In 1307, under orders of King Philip IV of France, the Templars were arrested, accused of heresy, and subjected to trials that ended with the suppression of the order by Pope Clement V in 1312. The dissolution left gaps that later traditions sought to fill. From the 14th century onward, stories emerged suggesting that not all Templars were destroyed. Some chronicles and later writings claimed they fled to Scotland or other distant territories, carrying with them relics, documents, or secrets. By the early modern period, these accounts were linked with the developing legend of the Merovingian bloodline. The suggestion was that the Templars, once trusted guardians of Christendom, had instead become guardians of a hidden lineage tied to sacred descent. In esoteric writings of the 17th to 19th centuries, this association grew stronger. Manuscripts connected the Templars to later movements such as Freemasonry, with symbolic links found in architecture, ritual, and heraldry. Theories placed them in North America before Columbus, tied to sites such as Oak Island in Nova Scotia, where excavations uncovered unusual shafts and markings, later interpreted as Masonic or Templar in origin. Though no definitive record confirms such transatlantic voyages, the narrative persisted, that the New World offered sanctuary for traditions the Old World sought to erase. In this way, the Templars became a bridge between the fall of a dynasty and the survival of a legend. In the late 19th century, the small French village of Rennes-le-Château became the center of enduring speculation. The parish priest, Béranger Saunière, who served there from 1885, drew attention for a sudden rise in wealth that seemed inconsistent with his clerical position. Parish records confirm that he began extensive restorations of the local church, dedicated to St. Mary Magdalene, during the 1890s. The renovations included unusual decorations and inscriptions. Visitors later noted the presence of carved demons, biblical scenes with irregular arrangements, and Latin phrases of uncertain meaning. The entrance of the church displayed the phrase, "Terribilis est locus iste," "This place is terrible," which was an uncommon choice for a parish setting. Saunière also constructed a tower named the Tour Magdala and a villa, both financed during this period of unexplained affluence. Archival correspondence shows that Saunière was repeatedly questioned by his diocese for misuse of parish funds, though no clear explanation was given for the scale of his expenditure. Following his death in 1917, rumors spread that he had discovered documents or treasures during his restorations. Some accounts mention parchments hidden within hollow columns, though no authenticated copies survive. By the mid-20th century, writers and researchers connected Saunière's activities to broader theories regarding the survival of the Merovingian bloodline. The suggestion was that the priest had uncovered proof of a hidden genealogy or material evidence tied to sacred descent. These claims were reinforced by later publications that linked Rennes-le-Château to secret societies such as the Priory of Sion. In this narrative, Saunier's sudden wealth was attributed not to misappropriated donations, but to the possession of knowledge powerful enough to draw support from clandestine sources. Though histories point to financial irregularities and profitable dealings in mass stipends, the site remained a focal point for speculation. Rennes-le-Château became integrated into the wider framework of Grail law, interpreted as a place where remnants of the Merovingian legacy surfaced once more, concealed within symbols and structures rather than official histories. In the 20th century, the Merovingian bloodline theory was given new form through publications that blended archival references with speculation. The most influential among them was Holy Blood, Holy Grail, published in 1982 by Michael Begant, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln. The work argued that the Holy Grail was not a chalice, but a lineage, one descending from Jesus and Mary Magdalene, preserved through the Merovingian dynasty. Central to their thesis was the alleged existence of a secret brotherhood known as the Priory of Sion. Documents deposited in the French National Library between the 1960s and 1970s, known as the Dossier Secrets, were presented as evidence of this society. The papers contained genealogies, references to Merovingian rulers, and claims of a preserved sacred line. These archives listed notable historical figures, such as Leonardo da Vinci and Isaac Newton, as Grand Masters of the Priory, suggesting an unbroken chain of guardianship. Subsequent investigations, however, revealed the documents to be modern fabrications. They were traced to Pierre Plantard, a Frenchman with connections to fringe political and esoteric movements. Plantard admitted under questioning in the 1990s that the materials were false, undermining the historical foundation of the Priory of Sion. Despite exposure of the forgery, the claims had already spread into popular consciousness. By the late 20th and early 21st centuries, these ideas migrated into literature, film, and eventually digital culture. Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, 2003, reintroduced the bloodline theory to a global audience, embedding the Merovingians into modern myth. Online forums, conspiracy archives, and independent researchers extended the narrative further, treating the bloodline not only as history, but as a living question. Thus, the Merovingian legacy entered the digital age as a hybrid of record and re-invention. Though the archival trail revealed both authentic chronicles and deliberate hoaxes, the persistence of the theme showed how adaptable the Grail narrative had become. Whether on parchment or screen, the claim of a sacred bloodline endured as part of cultural memory. The Merovingian dynasty, once a ruling house of the early medieval Franks, occupies a place in history not solely through political achievement, but through the persistence of narrative. Their association with sacred descent, preserved in chronicles, genealogies, and later reinterpretations, has carried them beyond the boundaries of established historiography. While the dynasty ended with the deposition of Childeric III in 751, its symbolic presence has continued. In medieval and early modern sources, echoes of their legacy appeared in symbolic forms. The fleur-de-lis, bees, and references to long-haired kings became recurring motifs in European heraldry and statecraft. With time, these motifs were reinterpreted, detached from their original dynastic context, yet never fully erased. In the 20th century, the Merovingian narrative was revitalized through publications such as Holy Blood, Holy Grail, 1982, which advanced the idea of a surviving bloodline tied to biblical origins. Although key evidence for these claims, including the dossier secrets of the Priory of Sion, was later exposed as fabricated, the theory gained cultural permanence. The reinterpretation of the Grail as a lineage, sang real or royal blood, entered public discourse, sustained through literature, film, and popular media. The early 21st century witnessed further amplification. Works such as The Da Vinci Code, 2003, carried the Merovingian motif into global consciousness, linking the dynasty to broader themes of secrecy, suppressed knowledge, and contested authority. Parallel to mainstream adaptations, esoteric societies and conspiracy theorists continued to reference the Merovingians as a preserved symbol of hidden sovereignty. No conclusive evidence has been produced to substantiate the claim of a surviving Grail bloodline. Yet the absence of proof has not diminished the fascination. The Merovingians remain a case study in how myth, symbol, and selective history can create enduring narratives. Their story illustrates the manner in which political memory transforms into cultural memory, and how the unresolved continues to exert influence across centuries. Perhaps the Grail was never a cup, nor even a bloodline, but a memory the world refuses to forget. The Merovingians began as rulers of the Franks, but their true legacy survives in symbols, stories, and speculation. Whether myth or memory, their shadow has never left the world stage. Perhaps the Grail was never a cup, nor a bloodline, but a question that endures. Who has the right to rule and why? If this record spoke to you, leave your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to Forgotten Chronicles for more hidden histories waiting to be unearthed.